Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. London, 1857. Fog hung heavy in the air like regret that wouldn't lift. On a narrow street off Haymarket, Mary stirred beneath a threadbare blanket, her limbs stiff with cold. The dim light of morning filtered through soot-smudged glass. Another day. The room was shared, walls thin, furniture scarce, warmth rarer still. Beside her slept Lily, her red hair a vivid splash on the pillow. Lily laughed even in sleep. She said it helped her remember she was still alive. Mary dressed slowly, methodically, each movement deliberate, a small rebellion against chaos. She washed with water that bit her skin, wrapped herself in the house's uniform, and stepped into the life she hadn't chosen but had accepted. The brothel, run by Mrs. Cartwright, was strict but orderly. Clean sheets, regular inspections, rules. There was a comfort in predictability, even if the work left a hollowness that no coin could fill. Clients came and went, some loud, some pitiful, some simply lonely. Mary learned to read them like patterns in fabric, where to tug, where to smooth. She said little, listened much. But some left bruises that didn't show. Some whispered cruel things after pretending gentleness, and some made her question how much of herself she had left. One night, she nearly fled. Cloak half fastened, coin hidden in her boot, but the fog outside was worse than the staleness inside. She returned to her room, sat on the floor, and wept until morning. Lily never asked, only laid beside her and reached for her hand. Then came Mr. Hamilton, quiet, well-dressed, but not showy. He asked questions others avoided. "What were you before?" he said. "A seamstress." He didn't laugh, didn't leer, just nodded. He came again and again, left more than coin, left books, gloves, a scarf. "For walking," he said, "if you ever get the chance." Mary didn't answer, but she folded the scarf gently and hid it beneath her mattress. It smelled faintly of cedar and possibility, and the next time a man raised his voice, she didn't flinch. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had started remembering she was more than this. The house grew quieter in winter. Clients thinned, illness thickened. Josephine coughed blood into her pillow. Mrs. Cartwright ordered more vinegar and bleach. Still, the smell of sickness clung to the curtains. Mary sat with Josephine at night, brushed her hair, hummed songs she half remembered from childhood. Lily watched from the doorway, silent. "I don't want to end like that," Lily whispered one night. "Not in this house. Not as a name people stop saying." Neither did Mary. But leaving wasn't simple, not when you had nowhere to go. Cartwright warned them often. The street was worse. There were raids, arrests, rumors of girls dragged into carriages and never seen again. London did not forgive women who tried to step outside their place. Then, one rainy afternoon, Hamilton handed her a letter. "My sister runs a shop in Bath. She needs help, if you want it." Mary read the note again and again. Eleanor's handwriting was neat, confident. The offer felt absurd, unreal. A trap? But when Josephine died, wrapped in borrowed blankets, Mary knew. She packed at dawn, told no one but Lily. "Write to me," Lily said. "I will." And she did. She walked to the station in silence, but with every step, her spine straightened a little more. Behind her, the fog began to lift. Bath struck her first with its quiet. The absence of shouting, of slamming doors, of street calls and drunken laughter. It was unsettling at first, like the world had gone too still. But beneath that hush lay something else. Order. Space. Eleanor met her at the station with a gloved handshake and sharp eyes, a woman of fewer words than expectations. Her dress was plain but pressed, her carriage brisk. She didn't ask about Mary's past, only nodded at the bag she carried and said, "We open at 8. The shop was narrow and smelled of soap, starch, and lavender. Rolls of fabric lined the back wall, deep burgundy, moss green, bone-white muslin, a seamstress's sanctuary. Eleanor gave her a stool, a corner, and a trial. She watched Mary stitch without hovering, corrected her without cruelty. "You hem too tight. Trust the thread." Mary's fingers, which had learned to tense at every loud voice, slowly softened into skill again. She sewed until her knuckles stopped aching, until she stopped counting the coins she could have earned with her body instead. At night, she slept above the shop, in a narrow bed with a quilt that smelled of clean cotton. She wrote letters to Lily, though she had nowhere to send them. Poured her thoughts into ink like water drawn from a well, deep, slow, necessary. In her second week, she awoke from a nightmare, hands grasping, breath heavy. She sat in the dark for hours, the candle flickering low. In the morning, Eleanor handed her a stronger wax taper without a word. Mary never forgot that small act. Eleanor rarely praised, but once, while adjusting the sleeve of a client's jacket, she said to Mary, "You've a surgeon's hands. Deliberate, unshaken." Mary blinked. For a moment, she felt whole. One day, a man stepped into the shop, tall, familiar, Hamilton. He didn't speak at first, only removed his gloves and offered her a book. "Still reading Dickens?" he asked gently. "When I can keep my eyes open." They spoke little, but his gaze lingered on her hands, no longer trembling, only working. When he left, he pressed nothing into her hand, only nodded. It felt oddly like freedom. By early spring, the shop had found its rhythm, and so had Mary. Her stitches no longer needed checking. Clients asked for her. Eleanor allowed her to keep the keys on Sundays. Mary took small walks on those quiet afternoons, down the limestone lanes of Bath, where ivy crept over garden walls and the bells of St. Swithin's marked time like a heartbeat. She wore the scarf Hamilton gave her, now faded but intact, and sometimes, when no one was looking, she smiled. One Sunday, she wandered into a bookshop tucked beside the apothecary. She didn't expect to see anyone familiar. But as she turned into an aisle, she heard a gasp. Mary? It was Ruth. She had been a kitchen girl back in Cartwright's house, barely 15 when Mary left. Now taller, fuller, her apron replaced by a wool shawl, her eyes still sharp. They sat on a bench outside, lay fried, the quiet between them full of memory. Ruth spoke first. "I left 2 months after you. They sold the place. New man took over. Rough one. Girls started disappearing." Mary's stomach turned. "I found work here," Ruth continued. "Seamstress for the vicar's wife. Thought I saw you once in the market. Didn't believe it." Mary reached for her hand. "I'm glad you did." That night, she couldn't sleep. Dreams twisted again, flashes of narrow rooms, muffled cries. She sat by the window until dawn, the candle burning low. The next day, Eleanor found her dozing at the table. "You can take a morning off," she said, gentler than usual. "The work will wait." Mary shook her head. "It helps to stitch." Eleanor hesitated. "Then the mind finds ways to mend through the fingers. I've known that truth a long time." It was the first time Eleanor spoke of pain, her own or otherwise. It made Mary see her differently, not just as a protector of rules, but a survivor of her own storms. Weeks passed. The shop buzzed quietly with work and whispered confidences. Mary started teaching a young assistant named Alice, nervous, clever, always watching. Mary recognized the look in her, the bracing for danger, the soft recoil at raised voices. "You don't have to explain anything," Mary told her one day. "Just keep showing up. That's enough for now." Alice's hands trembled on the first hem. By the end of the week, they did not. One afternoon, while Mary was pinning a bodice to a dress form, Eleanor looked up from her books and said simply, "Your mother would have been proud." Mary paused. "She was a laundress," she replied, "used to mend things late into the night." Eleanor nodded. "You mend more than fabric." That evening, Mary lit a second candle, not for fear, for remembrance. The shop was becoming something else, a refuge not just from what had been, but a testament to what could still be made with steady hands. By early spring, the shop had found its rhythm, and so had Mary. Her stitches no longer needed checking. Clients asked for her. Eleanor allowed her to keep the keys on Sundays. Mary took small walks on those quiet afternoons, down the limestone lanes of Bath, where ivy crept over garden walls and the bells of St. Swithin's marked time like a heartbeat. She wore the scarf Hamilton gave her, now faded but intact, and sometimes, when no one was looking, she smiled. One Sunday, she wandered into a bookshop tucked beside the apothecary. She didn't expect to see anyone familiar. But as she turned into an aisle, she heard a gasp. "Mary?" It was Ruth. She had been a kitchen girl back in Cartwright's house, barely 15 when Mary left. Now taller, fuller, her apron replaced by a wool shawl, her eyes still sharp. They sat on a bench outside, the quiet between them full of memory. Ruth spoke first. "I left 2 months after you. They sold the place. New man took over, rough one. Girls started disappearing." Mary's stomach turned. "I found work here," Ruth continued. "Seamstress for the vicar's wife. Thought I saw you once in the market. Didn't believe it." Mary reached for her hand. "I'm glad you did." That night she couldn't sleep. Dreams twisted again, flashes of narrow rooms, muffled cries. She sat by the window until dawn, the candle burning low. The next day, Eleanor found her dozing at the table. "You can take a morning off," she said, gentler than usual. "The work will wait." Mary shook her head. "It helps to stitch." Eleanor hesitated. Then, "The mind finds ways to mend through the fingers. I've known that truth a long time." It was the first time Eleanor spoke of pain, her own or otherwise. It made Mary see her differently, not just as a protector of rules, but a survivor of her own storms. Weeks passed. The shop buzzed quietly with work and whispered confidences. Mary started teaching a young assistant named Alice, nervous, clever, always watching. Mary recognized the look in her, the bracing for danger, the soft recoil at raised voices. "You don't have to explain anything," Mary told her one day. "Just keep showing up. That's enough for now." Alice's hands trembled on the first hem. By the end of the week, they did not. One afternoon, while Mary was pinning a bodice to a dress form, Eleanor looked up from her books and said simply, "Your mother would have been proud." Mary paused. "She was a laundress," she replied. "Used to mend things late into the night." Eleanor nodded. "You mend more than fabric." That evening, Mary lit a second candle, not for fear, for remembrance. The shop was becoming something else, a refuge, not just from what had been, but a testament to what could still be made with steady hands. Summer arrived in Bath like a balm. The warmth softened the stone buildings and coaxed flowers from cracks in the pavement. But for Mary, it also awakened restlessness, an ache that returned with long evenings and open windows. She found herself thinking of Lily more often, wondering if she'd escaped or been swallowed whole. Sometimes she caught herself speaking to her aloud in the back workroom, half confessions, half updates. Alice noticed. One day, while folding lace, she asked, "Was she your sister?" Mary shook her head. "Not by blood, but yes, in all the ways that count." She told Alice then, not everything, but enough, about London, the house, the way girls vanished without names or funerals. Alice listened, wide-eyed, then reached across the table and covered Mary's hand with her own. That same week, a letter arrived from Eleanor's cousin in Bristol. A girl there, a housemaid, had been dismissed under suspicion of dishonor. She was 17, no home to return to. Eleanor looked up from the letter. "Shall we take her?" Mary didn't hesitate. Yes, her name was Clara. She arrived with a carpet bag and a bruise beneath one eye. She wouldn't speak for days. But she watched how Mary threaded needles, how Alice boiled tea, how Eleanor kept her books without trembling. One morning, Mary found Clara in the back room, holding a scrap of fabric between her fingers like it might shatter. Mary said nothing, only sat beside her and began to sew. Clara mimicked the movement, clumsy at first, but quiet, intent. By midsummer, Clara stitched well enough to help with small tasks. She still didn't speak much, but she laughed when Alice dropped a thimble and it rolled under the counter. It was laughter like breaking ice. The rhythm of the shop changed again. Now there were 3 of them. Eleanor upstairs with her ledgers, Mary managing fittings, Alice and Clara whispering over bobbins. Clients began to linger longer. One brought biscuits, another donated a stack of magazines. Someone left wildflowers in a jar on the sill. The shop was becoming known, not just for fine tailoring, but for something harder to name. Kindness, perhaps, or refuge. One day, a letter arrived from the Ladies' Benevolent Society. They'd heard of Mary by name. Would she consider speaking at their next gathering? Mary read the letter twice, then folded it in half. Her first instinct was to burn it. Alice saw her hesitation. "You already speak to us," she said. So Mary went. Not in a grand dress, but in one she made herself. Clean lines, dark blue, buttons like soft punctuation. She didn't tell them everything, but she told them enough. "Some women don't need saving," she said. "They need space and time, and maybe someone who sees them as more than what they've been through." Afterward, a woman approached her, eyes glistening. "My daughter works in a mill," she said. "She's clever, but she's tired. Could she—" Mary nodded. "Send her." That night, Mary stood in the workroom alone, a candle flickering low. She thought of Lily again, somewhere by the sea, maybe, free. She hoped. Then she picked up her pen and wrote a new letter. Not to send, just to remember. To the girls who wake in fear, who stitch their lives back one thread at a time, you are not lost. You are becoming. Autumn crept in quietly, softening the air with its golden hush. Leaves turned and fell along the cobbled streets of Bath, and the days shortened into pockets of candlelit labor. Inside the shop, life continued, not loud, not easy, but certain. Mary now rose before dawn with a kind of reverence. She prepared tea for the girls, trimmed the lamps, unlocked the bolts. Her hands moved with grace born of repetition, and her voice, once rarely used, had become steady, warm, assured. Clara spoke more often now. Simple things, requests for fabric, compliments on stitches, the occasional story from her village. She had a gift for color, for finding harmony in mismatched bolts. Eleanor began to let her design the window displays. It thrilled her. It softened her. Alice, too, was blooming. She'd taken on ordering supplies and balancing the month's tallies. One evening, Eleanor handed her the account book entirely. "You've got the head for it," she said. "And the heart." Mary watched them both with quiet pride and a growing ache, because she could feel something shifting in herself. Not wariness exactly, but distance, like a seam pulled taut by too many strong stitches. She missed Lily with a pain both sharp and dull. In her dreams now, Lily stood by the sea, wind in her hair, eyes unreadable. "I waited," Lily would say, then fade. One evening, while locking up, Mary noticed a girl across the street. Barely more than a child, dirty skirts, bare arms despite the chill. Watching. Mary crossed slowly, offered her half a roll from supper, and the warmth of her voice. "You hungry?" The girl didn't speak, only nodded. They sat on the steps. Mary didn't ask anything more. Later, she told Eleanor, "I think we'll need another cot." Eleanor didn't sigh or object, only nodded once, firmly. "I'll fetch one tomorrow." That night, Mary returned to the back room and opened her box of letters. Letters never sent, never received. To Lily, to Josephine, even to herself. She read the one she'd written after the Benevolence Society event, then picked up her pen again. To the ones who were told they were nothing, who've been broken open and still rise each morning, "I see you. You are not debris. You are the thread." She folded the page, placed it in the box. The next morning, the girl from the steps returned. Her name was Emma, and just like that, the shop grew again. Winter settled over Bath like a hush, muffling the streets and frosting the shop windows with lace patterns of cold. Inside, the warmth remained, kept alive by wool, tea, and the quiet murmur of women building something more lasting than any season. Emma had begun to hum while she worked. Soft, tuneless melodies that made Clara smile and Alice pause mid-measure. She was still timid, often jumping at loud noises, but she now slept through the night. Mary placed an extra quilt at the foot of her bed and made sure there was always warm milk on the stove. The shop felt full, alive, and yet Mary sometimes stood in the doorway before dawn and wondered where else the thread might lead her. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she was learning that survival was only the beginning. What came after, no one had taught her. One evening, a man came in asking for repairs to his late wife's wedding dress. His voice trembled, and he could barely speak her name. Mary took the dress gently. "It's in kind hands now," she said. As she mended the torn lace, she found herself weeping, quietly, not for sorrow alone, but for all the women who never got to grow old in their own dresses, surrounded by softness, by time. That night, Eleanor made stew. Alice brought out her knitting. Clara read aloud from a magazine. Mary sat, hands folded, listening to the sound of girls becoming women, of grief transforming into comfort. Later, she lit a candle in the window, not to guide anyone home, but as proof they existed. Emma came to her the next day with a drawing. It was childish, uneven, but clearly a picture of the shop. 4 women stood in the doorway. One held a needle, one a book, one a bolt of cloth. One stood with open hands. "This one's you," Emma said. Mary looked at the small, shaky figure. "What am I holding?" Emma shrugged. "Room." Mary laughed, deep, startled, real. She pinned the picture to the workroom wall. Years later, the shop would be spoken of in whispers and in gratitude. The girls who passed through would write letters, send children, bring back fabric from foreign cities. The shop became known not just for dresses, but for rebirth. And Mary? She never stopped writing. "To the women who come after," she once penned, "we were not always brave, but we were always becoming." And she meant every word. Spring returned to Bath with shy blossoms and soft rains. By now, the shop was not just known, it was trusted. Women arrived from neighboring towns. Some brought fabric, others only silence. All were met with warmth. Mary had turned 40 that March. She marked the day quietly. Eleanor gave her a pair of silver shears, elegant and precise. Alice baked a tart with rhubarb and ginger. Clara embroidered her initials on a handkerchief. Emma sang a lullaby, off-key but sincere. That night, Mary sat by the fire and reread her earliest letters, the ones written in whispered hope and trembling resolve. She marveled at how far her hands had carried her, not just out of one life, but into many others. One day, a visitor arrived. She wore traveling clothes, dusty boots, and an air of long roads behind her. Mary looked up from her mending. The woman removed her hat. Lily? It was her. Older. Changed. But unmistakably her. They didn't speak at first. Just held each other, arms locked tight, both of them shaking with the weight of years. "I waited," Lily whispered. "And I kept the light on," Mary replied. That evening, they walked the quiet lanes of Bath together. Lily told stories of a coastal town, a boarding house, a garden she planted herself. She'd seen the shop's name in a letter from another girl. Mary of Bath, it said, a woman who helps the broken mend. She had come to see if it was true. Mary laughed, soft and sure. "It's not me," she said. "It's the thread we share." Lily stayed 3 days, then a week, then never left. She helped in the shop, taught Emma how to braid ribbons, read Clara's poetry aloud, teased Eleanor into smiling. One morning, she and Mary sat on the steps before opening. "You built something real," Lily said. "So did you," Mary replied. "You came back." Years later, long after Eleanor passed quietly in her sleep, the shop bore a new sign. Cartwright and Daughters, tailors, menders, makers, not to erase the past, but to reclaim it. Mary grew older, her hands stiffer, her steps slower, but her letters remained. She kept writing them until the end, addressed always to those not yet arrived. In the final one, she wrote, "If you are reading this, know you are welcome. There is room. There is light. You are not too late." And somewhere another girl read those words, folded them close to her chest, and began to walk toward Bath. She arrived in Bath just as the rain started to fall, quiet, slanting drops that softened the edges of the world. Her boots were worn, her coat too thin for the season, and the letter, creased and stained from the journey, trembled in her hands. It had no stamp, no return address, only careful script in black ink. "If you are reading this, know you are welcome. There is room. There is light. You are not too late." The girl Eliza, though no one in the last 3 towns had cared to learn her name, folded the paper again and tucked it close beneath her collar, near her skin. She didn't know who Mary was, or even if the place truly existed, but something in those words had struck a place inside her that hadn't felt warmth in months, maybe years. She asked twice before someone on the corner nodded vaguely. "That tailor's place near the square. All women, I think." The sign was old, hand-painted, Cartwright and Daughters, tailors, menders, makers, they. She hesitated. What if they turned her away? What if she was too late after all? But the door opened before she could knock. A woman stood there, white hair pinned back, eyes clear, lined, kind. Not surprised, not alarmed. "You've come far," the woman said. Eliza nodded, throat tight. "Come in then." The shop smelled of lavender and wood polish and warm wool. Voices murmured in the back. She caught sight of a girl younger than herself arranging buttons by color. Another was ironing. Someone was laughing. The white-haired woman, Lily, guided her to a chair. "Hungry?" Eliza nodded. "Good. You'll eat first, then we'll talk." She was given tea, buttered toast, and a seat by the fire. No questions yet. No judgment. Later, Lily returned with a folded shawl and placed it around her shoulders. "This belonged to the one who wrote the letter you carry," she said. "Mary, she's gone now, but not really." Eliza touched the shawl. It smelled faintly of dried roses and old books. Lily watched her. "Do you sew? I can mend, a little. We'll teach you the rest, tomorrow. Tonight you rest." And so Eliza stayed, not because she believed she belonged, but because, for the first time, no one said otherwise. In the weeks that followed, her hands grew steadier. She learned the names of stitches and the names of women. She learned that silence did not mean coldness here, and that pain, when spoken aloud, lost some of its teeth. She found the letters eventually, stacked in a box above the shelf. Dozens of them in Mary's script. Letters to no one, to everyone. Eliza began to copy them, one by one. She wrote new ones too. Her own voice, shaped by ash and fire and the long road behind her. "To the girl who's still out there," she wrote one night, "walking, hoping, fearing, there is a door that will open. There is a quilt that will cover you. There is a place that remembers your name, even before you speak it." She folded it, placed it in the box, then turned back to her work. The seasons turned again. Spring ripened into summer, and Bath filled with slow afternoons and the scent of blooming lilacs. The shop breathed steadily with the rhythm of shared labor, whispered stories, and the scrape of shears against linen. Eliza had grown into her place there, not just as a seamstress, but as a keeper of memory. She had taken to opening the shop each morning. She swept the floorboards with care, arranged the spools of thread by hue, and lit a small oil lamp by the box of letters. The ritual mattered. It felt like lighting a lantern in a tower, steady and waiting for whoever might be walking toward them next. One morning, a courier arrived with a parcel, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, bearing no sender's name, only the words, "To the women of Cartwright and Daughters." Inside was a book, hand-bound, its cover worn at the edges. Eliza untied the cord gently and opened the first page. It was a journal, not Mary's, someone else's. The script was unfamiliar, the ink smudged in places, but the voice was unmistakable. It was the voice of survival, of ache, of finding light again in a darkened world. The first entry began, "I was 15 the first time I was sold. I don't remember what I wore, but I remember the floor. It was cold, and someone said my name like it didn't belong to me anymore." Eliza felt the breath catch in her chest. The journal was filled with stories, not of fame, not of triumph, but of endurance. A girl who escaped a workhouse, another who hid in a theater for 3 nights, a widow who learned to tailor after losing everything. Each woman had found her way to safety, somehow. Each had left this behind, sent it forward. By the end of the week, Eliza had read every word. She placed the journal next to Mary's letters, but she didn't close it. She left it open to the page where someone had written, "Tell them we were here. Tell them we kept going." That night, Eliza stayed late. Lily had gone to rest, and the other girls had retired upstairs. The shop was still. Outside, the city exhaled with the hush of twilight. Eliza took a sheet of parchment and began to write. Not another letter, but something different. A welcome. To whoever finds this, she wrote of the first night she arrived, of the shawl, of the buttered toast, of Lily's hands, of Mary's unseen kindness stretching years past her death. She signed it simply, Eliza, seamstress, daughter by choice. She folded the page and placed it in the journal. Then with careful hands, she sewed a new label onto the inside hem of a linen dress in progress. The thread was gold, the stitches small but certain. It read, "Made in resistance." Because that's what they were still doing. Resisting forgetting, resisting despair. One stitch, one story, one woman at a time. Autumn brought a hush to the streets of Bath. The light came in softer through the shop's front windows, settling in golden pools over bolts of wool and velvet. Leaves clung to the cobblestones outside, and inside, the scent of cinnamon and firewood hung in the air. Eliza found she liked the quiet that came with the colder months. It gave space for memory. The letters grew. Each week, new ones were added, not just from Eliza, but from Clara, Alice, even shy Emma. They wrote to ghosts, to girls not yet arrived, to themselves. There was power in the naming, in turning silence into sound. One day, a young woman arrived at the shop's doorstep with her coat buttoned up to her chin and a small child clutched to her side. The boy couldn't have been older than 5. He wore shoes a size too big, and his hands were red from the cold. "I heard," she began, voice cracking, "I heard there's work, that you take people in." Lily came to the door first. Eliza joined her within moments. "We take women in," Lily said gently, "and their children if they come." The woman, Sarah, was given soup and a chair by the stove. Her son, Theo, was given a wooden spool to play with, which he rolled happily across the floor. In the weeks that followed, Sarah took to laundering linens and helping in the back room. She didn't sew, but she scrubbed with purpose. And when Theo smiled, the whole shop felt wider somehow, more alive. Eliza started reading the letters aloud at dusk, just before the lamps were lit. It became a kind of ritual, one voice speaking into the soft quiet, a way of remembering, a way of continuing. Lily rarely cried, but one evening, when Eliza read aloud a letter that Mary had once written, "We were not always brave, but we were always becoming." Lily pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, she'd be proud. More women came. Some stayed only a week. Some stayed years. Some left letters. Others left behind a pin, a name embroidered in a cuff, a pressed flower hidden in the folds of a curtain. These were their stories too. Eliza began to keep a book, not just of letters now, but of names, of faces, of memories shared and received. She called it the record of thread. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "This is not a register of suffering. It is a ledger of rising." And below that, Cartwright and Daughters, est in memory, kept in resistance. Each entry thereafter was written with the same care as a prayer. Winter came with its own kind of silence. Snow dusted the eaves of the shop and muffled the world outside. Inside Cartwright and Daughters, the warmth remained constant, stoked by the fire in the hearth and the steady hum of shared lives. With each passing month, the shop's name traveled further, not through advertisements, but through whispers, through letters smuggled in bread baskets, through quiet recommendations in kitchens, through coded phrases passed from handmaid to chambermaid. It was Eliza who first suggested what came next. "We could teach," she said one morning over tea, "not just the ones who find us, but the ones who can't." Lily looked up from her knitting. How? Letters, patterns, lessons by post. We could send them, one stitch at a time. And so they began. Each packet included a length of cloth, a spool of thread, a needle, and a small card with handwritten instructions. How to hem, how to reinforce a seam, how to mend a tear. But always, tucked inside as well, a note: "You are not forgotten. There is a sisterhood that sees you. You are part of something enduring." They sent out 5 packages that first week, then 10, then 20. Soon, letters began to return. Some were shaky and misspelled. Others came with pressed flowers or scraps of stitched fabric, tiny swatches of resistance. Each one was read aloud by the fire, folded carefully and placed into the growing record of thread. Alice organized the correspondence. Clara designed patterns. Emma managed deliveries with the help of a grocer's son who came twice weekly and always lingered longer than necessary in the doorway. One evening, a box arrived from Glasgow. Inside were 15 hand-stitched handkerchiefs. No name, only a note: "Taught them what you taught me." The community was no longer a house, it was a network, a quilt stitched across counties, invisible yet real, threaded not by location, but by intention. One day, Lily stood at the window and watched as 3 girls walked up the road together, coats buttoned tight, eyes alert but hopeful. "They're arriving in groups now," she said. Eliza joined her, "because they know they'll be received." And she was right. The shop grew, not in size, but in spirit. A library was added. A spare room turned into a study. A girl from Wales brought a printing press and began to print the letters into small pamphlets. They called it the threaded word. It was passed from hand to hand, burned when necessary, buried under floorboards, but always found again. And through it all, Cartwright and Daughters remained what Mary had first built it to be: a refuge, a promise, a quiet resistance. It began with a letter that never arrived. One of the thread packets sent to a village north of Bristol was returned unopened. The package had been torn open and crudely resealed. Inside, the cloth was gone, and the note, "You are not forgotten," had been scorched at one corner. Lily held it in her hand, silent. Eliza could see the tightening in her jaw. It wasn't just lost post, it was a warning. Soon after, 2 other letters failed to reach their destinations. One came back with ink smeared across the writing, soaked in something like oil. Another simply vanished. Then came the visit. A tall man in a gray coat entered the shop one morning, claiming to be from the local guild. He had 2 smooth hands and eyes that wandered not to the fabrics but to the books, the letters pinned above the hearth, the small stacks of thread-wrapped parcels. "We've received inquiries," he said lightly, "about the nature of your operation." Lily's voice was calm. "We mend, we teach, that's all." "But what you teach," he said, "may not always be welcome, not in every household, or by every employer." He left behind a thin smile and a silence that clung to the air. That night, Eliza found the front window smeared with paint. One word, crude and rushed: disruptors. For the first time in years, the door was locked early. Curtains drawn, candles burned low. The women gathered in the kitchen. Tea went untouched. Even Theo sensed something had shifted. He curled on Sarah's lap, quiet. "They're watching," Clara said. "Let them," Alice replied. "We've done nothing wrong." Lily looked at Eliza. "What we've done is remind them what women can build. That's more than enough to frighten them." They didn't stop, but they adapted. The threaded word went underground. The printing press was moved to the cellar. Lessons were now coded, recipes on the surface, patterns stitched beneath. Parcels were rerouted through grocers and laundresses. Every label now read not only "made in resistance," but also a mark, a tiny embroidered key hidden in a hem or a collar, because they would not stop. because they remembered, and because somewhere out there, another girl was still waiting for the first sign that someone had seen her for Flifruk. The knock came just past midnight. Eliza was still awake, sitting by the fire with her notebook open, copying a new recipe pattern hybrid when she heard it. 3 raps, spaced and low. The signal they'd agreed on in case of danger, or of urgent news. She opened the door cautiously. A boy no older than 12 stood on the threshold, drenched from the rain. His coat hung off one shoulder, and in his hand he clutched a parcel wrapped in oilskin. His eyes, wide, alert, and impossibly tired, searched her face. "Eliza?" he asked, voice raw. "I am," she said. "Come inside." He stepped in without hesitation, and she closed the door quickly behind him. Lily appeared in the hallway a moment later, tying her robe. The others followed. Sarah, Clara, Emma, all silent, the air between them taut. The boy set the parcel down on the table and pulled a letter from his pocket, damp but still sealed. "It's from Miss Grafton," he said. "In Portsmouth. She said to run. Said to give it to you directly. No one else." Eliza opened the letter with careful fingers. The handwriting was hasty. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were still legible. "They've begun arrests. 2 girls taken from the laundry school. They traced the printed pamphlets to us. We burned what we could. But they are asking questions now. About Bath. About Mary. About the letters. If you haven't already, hide the press. Protect the names. Tell no one new. I will hold them off as long as I can. But it is coming. Bad. Forgive me." Eliza read it twice, then passed it silently to Lily. The boy sat at the edge of the hearth, steam rising from his soaked clothes. "Have you eaten?" Clara asked gently. He shook his head. Sarah moved to the kitchen. "Soup, now." Eliza turned to Lily, her voice low. "They're moving faster than we thought." Lily folded the letter and pressed her palm against it. "We knew this would come. We just didn't know when." Emma stepped forward. "Then what do we do?" There was no hesitation in Eliza's voice. "We prepare." That night, they divided the names in the record of thread. Each woman took a portion to memorize. The original book was buried in a tin box behind the brick oven in the cellar. The printing press was dismantled and hidden beneath floorboards. Labels were changed, patterns redrawn, but the message remained. The boy, whose name was Jacob, stayed with them. He slept in the attic and helped restock coal and fetch post. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with clarity and quiet force. "They tried to scare Miss Grafton," he said one evening. "Said they'd ruin her shop, said she was harboring radicals." "And what did she do?" Eliza asked. He looked up. "She gave them tea, then sent me running." The women smiled, fierce and tender. Outside, the world was shifting. But within those stitched walls, they stood ready. Whatever was coming, they would meet it together. The days that followed were tense but purposeful. The house moved with hushed urgency, like a stage crew behind a velvet curtain. It was Lily who first said it aloud. "We've been defending long enough. It's time to stitch a message they can't ignore." The plan formed slowly, carefully, not of fire and noise, but of ink, fabric, and shared breath. A kind of tapestry, both literal and not. "We will create one garment," Eliza said, standing at the center table with her hands pressed flat on the wood. "It will travel, it will speak, and in every stitch, it will carry us." The women began at dusk. Each chose a section of cloth. Sarah embroidered a single line of verse. "We were here, we remain." Clara stitched symbols from an old code used by washerwomen. Emma wove gold thread into the hem that shimmered only in certain light. They called it the seamstress's coat, a long, slate-gray garment lined with hidden text. Inside its cuffs were names. Along the seams, sewn into double layers, were letters, folded tight as secrets. Each woman who wore it would carry a piece of the house with her and would add her own. The coat would travel to cities and villages, to market stalls and back alleys, to courts and kitchens and quiet corners where women still waited to be seen. Its final stop would be London. They selected Lena, a girl who'd arrived only 6 weeks prior, silent and bruised, but sharp-eyed and steady-handed. She'd taken to tailoring quickly, had memorized half the record already, and now stood by the hearth with a spine like iron. "I can do it," she said simply. No one questioned her. They packed her satchel with dried apples, spare thread, and a map with roads marked not by cities but by names. Women they'd helped, women who would now help her. As dawn broke, Lena stepped into the coat. It settled on her like armor. Not heavy, never heavy, but rooted. Lily kissed her forehead. "Walk quietly, speak if asked, and remember, We are always a stitch away. The door closed behind her. No one wept. Not then. Instead, they returned to work. More letters, more names, more pieces added to the record of thread, because the fight was no longer just about protection. It was about memory, about claim, about truth that could not be unwoven. And somewhere already, a girl in London would soon brush shoulders with a stranger wearing a coat she would not understand, but would feel. A quiet resistance, still moving. London was colder than Lena had expected. Not in temperature, but in its rhythm. The streets pulsed with speed and noise. The air smelled of coal smoke, and every corner turn felt like a question waiting to be asked. She arrived near dusk. Her boots ached. The seamstress's coat was buttoned tight around her, its weight both comfort and reminder. Beneath its lining, a dozen stories whispered with every step she took. The map had guided her to a boarding house above a print shop in Whitechapel. The landlady, a wiry woman named Mrs. Hatch, gave a single nod when Lena gave the code phrase, "I'm here about the mending." She was given a cot, bread, and directions to her first contact, a laundress named Edna who worked out of a factory in Lambeth. The next morning, Lena took the tram across the river. Edna was waiting with a basket of sheets and a quiet urgency. "They're watching our deliveries," she said. "Best you move light and fast. I have a cousin in Clerkenwell. You'll find her running a tailoring corner near the canal. Tell her I sent you and that the thread still holds." Each day brought Lena to new women. A baker who folded letters into loaves, a maid who passed messages sewn into petticoats, a midwife who whispered names over crying infants while slipping pamphlets into wood bins. And through it all, the coat began to change. One woman added a hidden pocket. Another stitched the sigil of her city into the lining. A third embroidered a single phrase near the collar: seen, heard, held. By week's end, Lena had passed through 8 homes, 2 kitchens, a bookstall, and 1 hidden cellar behind a chapel door. She was growing tired, yes, but more than that, she was growing certain. On the 9th day, she was stopped. A constable near Covent Garden, young, polite, but sharp-eyed, asked her name, her business. Lena smiled calmly and showed him her basket of linens, her hands calloused with real work. He waved her on, but that night, she moved quarters. Mrs. Hatch had already heard. "Too close," she muttered. "Time for you to go deeper." She sent Lena to a printer's attic in Soho, where a woman named Junia ran a reading room by day and resistance press by night. There, Lena unwrapped the coat and laid it out across a long work table. Junia lit a lamp and studied it with reverence. "This," she whispered, "this is scripture in cotton." They worked together until morning, binding edges, adding lines, pressing tiny stamps between the folds. And then Junia gave Lena a parcel in return. "Take this to Westminster," she said. "There's a governess there, serves tea to Parliament men. She's waiting for the sign." Lena took the parcel, wrapped the coat tight again around her, and stepped once more into the crowd. A single girl, in a city of millions. But inside her coat, 1,000 voices. And behind her, stitched into every seam, a quiet resistance, still moving Gek. Westminster was a different world. The streets near Parliament hummed with power. Coaches clattered by with polished brass, footmen in livery and men in tall hats speaking in low, deliberate tones. Lena moved through it like thread through dense fabric, quiet, persistent, unnoticed. She found the governess at the agreed-upon time, standing near the gates of a private school on a side street, just off Birdcage Walk. Her name was Margaret Willoughby, a woman in her 40s with a composed posture, a lined face, and eyes that flicked sharply from shadow to shadow. "You've come far," Margaret said, her tone even. "Is the parcel with you?" Lena nodded and handed over the small bundle from Junia. Margaret opened it beneath her shawl and glanced briefly inside. Then she gave Lena a tight smile. "Good, you'll follow me, but at a distance. When I adjust my hat, you'll enter the mews behind the brown carriage house." Lena did as told. 10 minutes later, she stepped into a candle-lit parlor filled with quiet rustle and urgency. Inside were 4 women, all governesses or ladies' companions, all keepers of homes that were not theirs. And yet each had memorized names, each had seen letters, each had read the threaded word. They gathered around the coat as Lena unfolded it across a wide table. "This," Margaret said softly, "will speak louder than any scream. We've waited a long time for something like this." The plan was precise. The governesses had access, not to the men themselves, but to their moments of distraction. Gloves forgotten, tea left unguarded. notes carelessly discarded. From now on, the seamstress's coat would be worn not only in back alleys and soup kitchens, but in the marble halls of power. One governess would wear it to a parliament spouse's tea. Another would sew a scrap of it into a decorative cushion in a lord's drawing room. A third would use it to line a muff she passed between women during morning walks in Hyde Park. Each gesture was small, undetectable, but laden with meaning. "We will not shout," Margaret said. "We will echo." And Lena? She would not return home yet. Her journey wasn't over. "There's a boarding school in Oxford," Margaret told her. "A teacher there. She's been hiding a copy of the threaded word in the folds of her classroom maps. They've begun to suspect." She asked for help. Lena nodded. And so, the next morning, the seamstress's coat took once more to the road. But now it carried more than names and prayers. It carried plans. In Bath, the women continued their sewing. In Glasgow, more handkerchiefs arrived. In Portsmouth, the fires had been put out, but the ashes held warmth still. And in London, beneath the arches and behind the velvet curtains, women passed glances, notes, threads. The resistance no longer whispered, it pulsed. Oxford was stone and shadow, tall spires and ancient echoes. Lena arrived as the chapel bells struck noon, their notes carrying over snow-covered quads and ivy-clad halls. She wore the coat buttoned to her throat, her face half hidden beneath a bonnet, and carried no more than a parcel and a name, Miss Agnes Fairley. Agnes taught literature at a girls' boarding school, tucked behind a gatehouse near St. Giles. On the surface, it was a place of order, perfect posture, perfect handwriting, perfect silence. But Lena had been warned. Something below that surface stirred. She found Agnes in the library, a tall woman with a slight limp and dark eyes like ink stains on parchment. Her voice was low, deliberate, and full of meaning unspoken. "I've waited for this," she said, one hand resting lightly on the parcel. The girls, they don't say much, but they listen. That night, Lena sat in a room of hidden watchers. 10 girls, ages 13 to 16, sat with notebooks open, pretending to transcribe passages from Tennyson. But their eyes never left Agnes as she read aloud. Not just poetry, but pieces of the threaded word disguised in verse. "You see," Agnes said softly, "truth doesn't always knock. Sometimes it slips in under the door." For 3 days, Lena stayed at the school. She repaired uniforms, helped in the kitchens, walked in the cold garden paths with the girls. She spoke little, but each night she sewed something new into the coat. A fragment of overheard courage, a question whispered in fear, a poem scrawled in the margin of a Latin primer. Then, on the 4th day, Agnes took her aside. "They've searched the dormitories twice now," she said. "There's a matron who reports to the dean. He suspects me." "What will you do?" Lena asked. Agnes smiled faintly. "What I've always done, but I'll need you to carry the next part forward." She handed Lena a bundle of pages tied in blue ribbon. New letters, new names, and something else, a curriculum. Lessons on mending, on history, on voices erased, for the ones who teach, so they remember what teaching can be. That evening, Lena left Oxford under cover of snow. The coat was heavier now, but it did not burden her, because weight is not the same as sorrow. Sometimes it is the measure of mattering, and in her satchel between thread and bread was a new book, one that would not be shelved, but passed, quietly, steadily, like a stitch through cloth, a quiet resistance, still moving. York was Lena's next destination, its cathedral spires like fingers clawing at the gray sky, its alleyways older than memory. She arrived as the bells tolled vespers, the streets slick with mist, the river swollen with winter melt. She carried no name this time, only a symbol stitched into the lining of the coat's left sleeve, a tiny bellflower, thread blue, known only to one woman in the city. Her contact was an apothecary named Mrs. Isabel Grange, whose storefront bore the scent of rosemary and sulfur. By day, she sold tinctures and herbs to old men with aching joints and mothers with fevered babes. By night, her mortar ground more than medicine. "You're early," Isabel said when Lena arrived, her sharp eyes narrowing with caution and relief. "And thinner than I imagined." "Travel does that," Lena replied, offering the code. "I mend what others discard." Isabel didn't smile, but her posture softened. She closed the shop and led Lena into the back room, where a wide wooden table stood beneath shelves of dried roots, paper packets, and glass jars. A single oil lamp burned beside a half-finished packet of crushed bark. "What I do here," Isabel said, "isn't what people think." She lifted a panel beneath the table to reveal a trapdoor, and beneath it, a room, barely lit, stacked with crates of paper, jars of ink, bundles of linen. York was once quiet, but they came here last spring. 3 arrests, a girl taken from the kitchen at the bishop's residence. I've been waiting for something to stir again. Lena stepped into the hidden cellar and unfolded the coat. The candlelight shimmered off its stitches. Isabel ran her fingers across the hem as if reading Braille. You've brought more than stories. I've brought a curriculum, Lena said. Lessons, names, a plan. They spent the next 5 days preparing. Isabel identified women in the surrounding parishes. A brewer's wife, a vicar's niece, a laundress at the abbey. Lena traveled between them, sometimes under moonlight, sometimes in rain. She handed out bundles wrapped in plain linen, each with a symbol, a pattern, a phrase that stitched them back to Bath. At night, they gathered in Isabel's cellar. The women spoke softly, some in tears, some in fury, but none turned away. One of them, a weaver named Molly, brought a scrap of cloth with her mother's initials cross-stitched in faded red. She never had a place like yours, Molly said, but she taught me to read before she died. Said we come from a long line of women who refused to vanish. Lena sewed the initials into the lining of the coat. Before leaving, she knelt by the hearth in Isabel's back room and pressed her hand to the warm stone. Where to next? Isabel asked. Lena looked up. I don't know, but I'll feel it when I arrive. And with that, she slipped out into the fog, the coat around her, her satchel heavier with new letters, her steps quiet but resolute. Behind her, York began to breathe again. The road home was neither straight nor swift. Lena passed through towns too small for maps, where only a single woman knew the meaning of a certain stitch, or how to slip a letter into a basket of bread. Each place gave her something, a word, a name, a touch, and in return she gave the coat. By the time she saw the rooftops of Bath again, spring had returned. The trees lining the square were in bud, the shop windows reflected light and softened shades, and Cartwright and Daughters stood as it always had, plain and certain, like a sentence with no need for flourish. Eliza met her at the door. No questions, only arms around shoulders and the deep relief of shared breath. The women gathered that evening, not to plan, not to warn, but simply to witness. Lena unfolded the coat, now heavier than ever, and laid it across the wide table. They ran their hands along its seams, read the names, touched the symbols, felt the weight of countless lives stitched into one. And then, one by one, they added their final pieces. Lily embroidered Mary's initials just above the hem. Sarah sewed a scrap from Theo's outgrown shirt into the lining. Clara added the name of a girl they had lost that winter. When it was done, Eliza pressed a small label into the collar. Not stitched, just placed, gently. It read, "You are the end and the beginning. Carry us forward." The coat was not sent out again. Instead, it was displayed in the shop's front window. No sign announced its meaning. No plaque declared its history. But those who knew, knew. And those who didn't, well, some paused. Some wept without knowing why. Some returned days later, pressing their hands against the glass. The house never stopped its work. Letters still came, threads still unraveled and rewove, but the fight was no longer one of hiding. It had become one of remembering. Years passed. Girls became women. Some stayed, some left and built new houses, new shops, new circles. But each bore the mark. Each was stitched with the knowledge. They had been seen. They had mattered. They had made. In time, the shop was renamed. Not Cartwright and Daughters, but simply the House of Thread, and beneath the name, carved in quiet script, built in memory, kept in resistance, made in love. And so the small room that was once just an old dress shop became a haven for weary souls, a home stitched together from memory, resilience, and the quiet strength of ordinary yet extraordinary women. The letters continued, the dresses were sewn, and the stories, though whispered, were never lost. Do you feel this story found its ending? Was there a moment that stayed with you? If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And before the night falls, don't forget to send your good night wishes to them, to the women who lived, who loved, who lost, and who carried on, with all the courage they had.